struggle with painting trees? It looks easy, but then why do our trees end up looking like blobs? There's nothing more frustrating than creating a beautiful project and then have your focal image, those beautiful trees, not work out. If this happens to you, you're not alone. Painting trees can seem easy, but to get the best results, there's a few fundamental things you need to understand to get the best results. So before we start painting, let's talk about what we're trying to paint. When we were children, we were taught how to draw a very basic tree like this. So that when we think about drawing a tree, this might be the basic outline that we always refer back to. Or maybe you learn to draw a tree like this. These are both representations of a tree, but they are very graphical and cartoony. When I'm working in my art journal and in paintings, I like to try to create whimsical trees, but I do want them to look more photorealistic, not graphical. So to help us understand what a tree looks like, let's walk around Fish Creek Park and look at some examples of trees. For fir and spruce trees, you'll see spaces between the branches, so that when you paint these trees, be aware that you should always have holes of light between those tree branches. These trees, depending on their age and their health, can be very dense trees, especially if they are growing in a group. Their branches can be quite close together and create a much denser tree. You'll notice that their ends usually point out in different directions. If they aren't manicured, they tend to be a little bit of a wild-looking tree. There are also ponderosa pine trees. These aren't native to my area, but they are planted in my neighborhood. These have less needles at the base of the tree, but they have lots of bushy needles closer to the ends of the branches. They remind me of a bottle brush, and they have much softer needles. These are just a few examples of trees. Take some time to go for a walk and video or photograph trees in your area. This makes painting so much easier when you have a reference. For my first tree, I want to think about the rule of thirds, and I want to put my first line along the third line. And the first thing we want to do to make sure that we get a really good tree shape is we need to make sure that we start really tiny at the top. So I'm doing a couple little dots. I'm also running this down with a couple little dots. And then what I'm going to be doing at this point is for every area, I am just going to make my dots a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. So what we're doing is creating a diagonal with little dots just to try to get the sense of like how big we want our tree. So if you want to have a tree that's really big and round like a Christmas tree, you could also do this much bigger. The reason I'm doing this first is one thing I found when I was starting to paint trees is that they would get really thick really early and they kept looking really squat. And there's nothing worse than you want something that looks nice, kind of nice and balanced, and you end up with a tree that kind of looks like a puddle and looks really, really thick. That's why I've started this structure, because this helps you get a sense of how big you want your tree. I want to start filling in these areas. So I'm just using a round brush and putting in little dots. So some of these dots go below, some of these go above. But the idea is you don't want to have them so thick that there's no space in between them, because from what we talked about before, there's a lot of space in these trees. So think almost like dot up, dot down, dot up, dot down, some more up, a few more down. And they don't even need to connect at this point. So you can see even as it is, my tree's gone a little bit thick a little too early on. So I'm gonna show you how you can fix that in just a sec. The reason I never do the tree all the way to the top is because sometimes you get too thick. So then what you can do is you can thicken these out a bit, and that way you end up with a tree that looks a lot more normal. And the key at this isn't to make your tree perfectly uniform, because perfectly uniform trees don't look real. So it's hard to do though, because I feel like some of my trees look like they've been pruned and left in a park and look all perfect. So I'm using a size 2 brush for this, but as I'm going along, I'm going to move up to a slightly larger size brush. So I'm moving up to a 4. What the 4 is going to allow me to do is do slightly larger marks and cover a lot more area a little bit more quickly. This allows you to be able to be a little bit more decisive. But I think the key to this is starting to start with a nice structure. And trees are easy yet hard. I found that when I was starting to paint, I would start with trees, and I really did struggle at first until I'd figured out a few of these things. I'd taken a few different painting classes from different people, and I started figuring out by even just looking at trees, which was actually a huge part of it, what I wanted for a tree. And this technique works really well for really tiny trees as well as larger trees. Just up the size of your brush and up the size of your strokes, And that's just a really good way of being able to adjust this for a different size painting, a different size idea. And then for these bottom ones, I always like to have some bottom branches that pretty much graze the ground as well too. We're gonna start by adding in a little bit more Payne's Gray to our mix. This is gonna darken everything. And we're just gonna start adding in some spots that are darker. And we're also gonna start connecting some of these branches. And the areas that are still wet, that's gonna give you more of a wet on wet technique. The areas that are dry are going to be a little bit more contrasting. But I think the key with this is you don't wanna lose your trunk completely. You just don't necessarily want to have it perfect. And now what I'm doing too is I'm also connecting some of these spots within the tree. That's going to give it a little bit more of a natural look because again, branches will touch each other. They're going to stick out, they're going to be uneven, they're going to do their thing. So some of this is, we're trying to move away from perfect looking tree. You need to have a few branches, otherwise this again is looking a little bit too perfect. And that's already looking better. And if you want to have a couple lighter spots, just add in a little bit of yellow. I'd probably do just like maybe the top third or so of the tree. It's going to bring in a different hue, but that's also going to bring in a little bit of variation. So these techniques will work really well in either watercolor or acrylic, but I find that using the square brush works a little bit better with acrylic, so I'm going to be showing you that today. I'm going to be using a combination of some Hooker's Green and some Bone Black acrylic paint. And when you're using a square brush or even an angle brush, I often will just start with a little bit of the Hooker's Green along with a little bit of the black. And if you don't have a round brush, the other option is just basically change the direction of the brush and use it on the surface. So this is going to give you a fairly thin line depending on the pressure that you down on the surface. So this basically just shows the background I already had created, just using some acrylic paint. Those first ones are a little bit hard just because you just don't want to go too heavy with them. But basically I'm doing tiny little squares. Doing basically a little set of 3 and a little set of 3 all the way down the tree. So this is a pixelation style that I originally learned from Connie Geertz, who's a local artist here in Calgary. I've done a lot of pixelation style paintings where you focus on only using square marks. And it's a really fun and unique way of doing painting. And so sometimes we want to actually cross over the center and have some areas that are a little bit thicker and thinner. I've actually am using fairly transparent paint for this first step. This also gives you the option where if you feel like you have something that isn't going particularly well, you can easily fix it at this point. With acrylic, it's a little bit easier just to add in a little bit of water and just wipe off what you have. Unlike watercolor, which I find once you set the paint down, you can't really adjust it. I find with acrylic, there's a little bit more room for adjustment. You can start with the 3 marks down. You can also do some connecting marks like I've done before. You'll also notice in some areas I'll do a group of 3, and then some of the times as I'm going further down the tree, I want to add in a deeper set of marks. And I would say that with this one, I am finding that my trees are getting a little bit perfect, which I do struggle with. I tend to make them look well pruned and a little bit more perfect, but I'll try to work on that a little bit, but it takes a little bit of work to find that balance between having a tree that looks amazing and having a tree that looks a little too perfect. I've added a little bit more black, so I'm going to add in those spots there. I usually do that. So more to the bottom branches, because it just gives a bit of a better color. You can just do them all in black, but in this case I wanted to have a little bit more variation to my tree and just show you how you can add highlights and lowlights. And for those who have signed up for my email list, I actually am going to be sending you this week my PDF that I've created with step-by-step instructions on how to do each one of these trees. But if you aren't interested, I also do have an online shop and you can purchase it there as well. So just adding a little bit more darkness, adding a few more things just to try to make this look a little bit more full. And if you want some highlights, I often will just add in a little bit of white to my green. And that's going to give you something that's in the same color family but quite a bit lighter. It's actually too light, so then I'm going to come back in because again the white's quite opaque while this particular Hooker's Green is fairly translucent, at least the version of it that I have here today. Well, this is where you could add in small areas of lighter color. So you need to think about when the sun hits a group of trees, if they're going to catch more of the light on the higher branches over the lower branches. So in this case, I'm not even painting all the way to the bottom. That's just another way you can add in a little bit more variation to your tree. And you can go in quite a bit further with this. Like often when I do this on my own trees, sometimes I'll have 4 or 5 different colors and I will add more and more layers. But we're gonna try to keep it simple today just so that I don't lose you in the process. Since I forgot to start my camera, I want to show you how to create this tree here. Basically, you're using a different stroke than either the dotted stroke or the square stroke that we did with the acrylics. I'm basically mixing up some Hooker's Green and Payne's Gray together. So we're just gonna create little dashes. So what this is gonna do gives you a sense of the shape of the tree and where it's gonna sit. And with this particular tree, you're gonna notice there's a lot more spaces in between the branches. When we're doing this, we want to create strokes out. See, this is a hard thing. Is I find that I tend to, with the first ones, I end up making them a little bit too thick. So we're doing a stroke out, and then we're adding in other strokes. But it's trying to figure out how to have the variation of the stroke in a way the tree's getting tall again, because yeah, this is the problem, is like sometimes it's hard to always get it quite the right size the first time around. So all I'm doing is just stroking out, adding little strokes down, adding strokes out, and we're just going to make this tree a little bit thicker as we go. And you want some of them connect at the bottom, some to connect at the top. You don't want it to be too floofy like this. Instead, you want it to actually have more of a line out and then little branches. And that's hard, because I think the hard thing I find with this one is that you end up going a little too thick, or you have one stroke out too far, then you need to thicken your whole tree moving up. And this is where I would maybe move to a larger brush than what I'm using. I think the smaller brush, I'm doing too many little marks. I'm gonna move up to a size 4, and I'm hoping this is gonna help a little bit. And always come in and do more strokes. The idea is you want them a little bit more face down. You want to have ones coming off the ends, but it should be kind of thicker one area and then thinner the rest of the way down. I always do little grasses at the bottom as well too. Now that I've actually created the shape, now we can come in and fine tune it. But this is probably not the fastest way to do a tree, but I think especially if you're new to trees, it's a way of getting consistent results. I'm just going in, refining this tree a little bit. And really, this tree should be a little bit darker at the bottom than it is at the top. Depending on where the light's coming, I haven't really done these for a light direction, but I always find that when the tree is usually just a little bit darker. And this is where you can put in some darker strokes too, because it's going to give it more of a sense of movement and texture, like you'd actually see in a tree. So by understanding a few fundamentals, you can create some beautiful trees. They do take some practice though, but starting with a good base of what to look for when you're trying to create trees is going to help you create beautiful results for any of your projects. And if you'd like to have something to reference back to, check out the PDF. I have the link below. That's a free PDF that for the next month or so I'm going to have available for you here. After that, it's going to go up on my store. So take advantage. Check out that PDF. I give you instructions, step-by-step, and illustrations about how to paint the 3 trees that I shared with you today. So I would love for you to check that out. And if you're looking for another video about how to paint trees, click here. This is one that I did a while back about how to paint trees with ink. And I created a really fun and moody tree. So I'll see you in that next video.